Okay, so hey folks. So after I published my book in December 2022, after I hit publish and then I posted on social media, a whole bunch of people started asking me questions around what did you do to publish? What was your writing process? How do you market it, et cetera, et cetera. And I was talking to Donna. I know Donna for a long time now. She's been a good friend for years and years now. And so I was talking to Donna, who's also an author, and apparently she also constantly gets that question. You know, a lot of people have stories in them that they want to share, and they have done the hard work of actually writing a lot of this. Some of the people have done the hard work of writing some of their stories down, but don't know how to publish it because the publishing industry is just completely new to them. And some people have not started yet, and a lot of questions keep coming up. So Donna and I thought that this would be a very good way to answer the questions. We'll share our experience and we'll share the lessons that we have learned. And Donna has been an author for several years now. She's published many fiction books, many nonfiction books, and I'm a very recent author as well. I just went through this journey, and a lot of my knowledge is pretty current too. So I'll share my experience and my lessons, and that's the idea of this webinar. But before we go into this, I wanted to first properly introduce myself. A lot of times, especially being in a big technology company, people think that your success is very unidimensional, really. You go from one level in Microsoft to another level, you get promoted every couple of years, and you get this big title in the company, and that is what success is. And I talk about this in my book, Daring to Be Different. This is not what I think of as success. Success is not, in my mind, unidimensional. I think success is very much, you have to think about it in a holistic way. And for me, success is around having a lot of different experiences. I travel a lot, and that is what you see on the slide. I'm a big traveler. I love traveling. I love learning about new cultures. I love meeting new people, eating good vegan, vegetarian food and whatnot. But I love traveling. That's a very important part of my identity. I've been a runner. It's not something that comes to me very naturally, but I enjoy running. I do it. I try to do it. I try to improve my running, but that's a part of my identity. Donna knows I read a lot of books, sometimes very difficult, boring books, and in her view. So I'm a big reader. So if you have a conversation with me for 30 minutes, I'll probably give you at least two book recommendations. That's an important part of my identity. Of course, Microsoft and my day job and technology is a big part of my identity. I'm a partner engineering director in the Windows and Devices group. And you see my team over there. That's something that I've done for 2 decades now. So I've been in the technology industry for 2 decades. I'm a public speaker, again, something that doesn't come very naturally to me. Donna was the first one who actually said that you should go out there and talk to 200 people, super, super anxious, super nervous. I talk about this in my book as well. I had to overcome a lot of my fears, and I had to learn specific skills and tips to learn how to do public speaking. It's not something that I learned when I was in school. So, this is something that I've been working on and getting better at. But now I'm a public speaker. I'm actually doing global events and conferences and talks in my company, talking at the UN and so on. So this is something that is very, very new to me and something that I've been working on for the last few years. Writing, though, is something I absolutely enjoy. This is something I've been doing for many years since I was a little girl. I've written stories, I've written little essays in my notebook, I've written a lot in my journal. That's something that truly, truly I enjoy doing. Before I even wrote this book, I've written quite a lot, and I'll talk about this when I get into the real meat of the seminar, but I want to hand it off to Donna to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This is fun. I love these. So, just some framing. You may have seen us talking about a bunch of random stuff that's not tech related this year. And that's because everyone I know has entered their villain era. Okay. This is the part where we're like, day job, that's great. But actually, what we want to do is share everything we've learned over the past, I don't know, 20 something years about everything else, right? How do you have a successful day job while doing a bunch of other stuff? Why do I sound far away? Philippe, thank you. I did something terrible to my teams, and because of that, I sound super far. No, microphone should be working. Real tech audio. Anyway,
How's that? Is that better or is it worse?
Much better.
Oh, okay, much better. Okay. So we're in our villain era. We're now at a place where we just want to share a bunch of experience and adventures that we've had doing all sorts of other things. But also, I think the most important thing that to take away, if you need to take away something, is that it is absolutely possible to have a day job that you're good at, that you like doing, while having a whole another life that has nothing to do with your day job. I talk about this all the time because I truly believe all of my confidence, and I mean all of it, comes from not focusing 100% on my day job. So I've got a lot of things on the side. I started actually as a fiction author. I used to write books for teens, and then I switched to nonfiction. Then I became a fashion designer. Then I became a public speaker, and then I became a random influencer, like weird side pivot for a few years. And now I'm, just telling everyone all the things. Oh, and I'm a restaurateur. So in terms of random, I have them all. But I have to tell you, being an author and publishing is near and dear to me because it's the thing that made me realize, like, oh, there's so many ways to get your message and the things you believe out into the world that have nothing to do with your day job. So I am always very, very happy and open to share whatever I can about the publishing journey. Again, my publishing journey started a long time ago. So one of one of the things I think is very interesting is Raji went through her actual like publishing of the book journey last year. I went through mine in 2002. So there's a big difference between 21 years, right? And the things that are available today were absolutely not available then. And the journey of going through, a traditional publishing process compared to a solo publishing process, really different. There's pros and cons to both, and we're going to hit on both of those.
All right, so this is my book. Let's get into what we want to talk about, book publishing and our experience, our collective experience doing this, both with a self-publishing route, a traditional publishing route. So in December 2022, I wrote my book, Daring to Be Different, Stories and Tips from a Woman Leader in Tech. And that's a book, it's a collection of stories and experiences from my professional life and my personal life that is intended to help the early in career, mid-career folks that are trying to get to the next level in their career, learn some career tips and tricks that I have learned throughout my 20 years in this industry. I'll drop a link later in the chat to my book. It's available on my website, rajiraj.com. But that's been quite a journey. Before I even started publishing and thinking of writing and publishing this book, I have been writing for a long time. A number of you probably in this webinar, you know that I have written quite a lot on my LinkedIn blog, on my website. This is something that I did to experiment with my writing. As I said, I started writing a long time ago in my journal, writing things for myself that I didn't publish. Those were little experiments along the way. I think the first thing that you want to do is to kind of get over your writer's block. And I do that every single day. I just get up, and after I do my meditation, I write something in my journal that is not intended for publication. And that is an important part of my process, mainly because I think it helps me get my thoughts out on paper, and it kind of unblocks the thing in your head that says you cannot write anything. Because you're not writing for publication, you're actually, is this working? Is this?
Yeah, totally good.
Yeah, so because you're not writing for publication, you don't have a lot of things that you want to edit and revise, and oh, is this going to look great? What are other people going to think of me? You don't have all that inner voice, all that inner critic that is telling you not to write this or not to write that. So I just started writing, and that is the first bit of my experiment, is to write for myself and see if I can have that habit. And I did that for several years. And then I started writing on my blog. Like I said, a lot of you follow me on my LinkedIn blog. I wrote at least to 2015, right, Donna? I think I started writing in my blog regularly since 2015. Yeah. And I had been collecting sort of reader responses. How are people responding to what I'm saying? Is this landing well with my readers? Do I have to tweak something? And is this working for myself? Is it working for my readers? So a lot of feedback for several years. It's that little baby step, right? It's not like I right away started writing my entire book, but it's started trying to take little baby steps and see how people are reacting, and if the material is landing, is this even relevant and useful? So that's the second thing. I also do a lot of mentoring in the company in Microsoft. I do a lot of mentoring in the industry, and a lot of these conversations, conversations are a great way for me to kind of collect material in terms of what is top of mind for people. What are people struggling with? Because my chosen area of writing is about career and career experiences and career tips in this during this stage in my life. That's what I'm writing about, and that's the purpose I wrote about that is because I want to be useful to the next generation of leaders in the technology industry and beyond, to be able to get bigger success in their career. So that's why I wrote this book. So I wanted to collect really what is important for people. What are people struggling with? So that was a very good way for me to understand what I should write about, right? So a lot of the mentoring conversations, a lot of writing in my blog, and regularly doing that and seeing how people react to it, that led to people actually coming to me and telling me, hey, maybe you should write a book. So this is sort of a red thread in my entire journey. Even if I think about, and I talk about this a lot in my book as well. If I think about my career in technology industry, I did not join this industry because I was somehow passionate about technology, right? I hear a lot of my colleagues say that very passionate about technology, that's why I joined the technology industry. For me, it was a bit of okay, I didn't get what I wanted in the first place. So what is there that, my aptitude, my skills, and my desire to solve problems for the world and make a meaningful impact to the world, what is the field that I should choose? So I ended up in a sort of as an accidental technologist in this field. So the red thread in my sort of my professional life, and you'll learn about it if you read my book, the red thread, and that is also, as well as in my writing journey as well, is that I did not sit around planning extensively. I did not do a 5-year plan for writing. I did not do a 5-year plan, 10-year plan for my career. It's pretty much, being curious and having the courage to try new things and being experimental in my approach, taking little baby steps. So that's what I would say, what has really helped me in my journey. Be curious, what do you want to write about? And how do you want to write about it, and be courageous. I think writing and publishing, you fear rejection a lot. I mean, at least I do. When I hit publish, I always fear, okay, is this going to be resonating with the world? Is someone going to think that this is just so stupid? I kind of have all those fears in my head, and I think you need to be able to drum up the courage to just say, I'm not going to aim for perfection here. This is good. And this is going to be a story that is worth sharing with the world. And I'm going to share this. So that courage is an important part. And once you have that courage and the curiosity, you need to be able to sort of take those little baby steps and experiment in your own way. Your experiment might be different from my experiment. Donna, your process and your journey would probably have been very different from my own journey. And I'm sure that every single person in this room, I think it's going to be a very different journey for them as well. But I think experimentation and taking those baby steps is super, super important. And once I decided to write and publish, I think this was last year when Donna and I had a conversation. It's like, okay, I'm going to write this book, publish it by the end of this year. And of course, I've been writing the book. Like I said, I've been collecting material for a long time.
To be clear, you finished writing this book like 2 years ago. Like,
yes,
she's been done. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had the material, I had the manuscript. But again, I was sitting on the manuscript. I know a number of you have told me this in this call, that you have a manuscript that you have not published as well. So I was in that boat too. And last year I was having this conversation, and then Donna she gave me a sort of an artificial deadline. By the end of this year, you're publishing the book. And I somehow thought that was very, that was give me a timeline, I'll hit it, right? That was a very useful mechanism for me to, for a friend to give me a timeline, or myself to give, to give myself a timeline, right? So that was a very useful trick for me, is to have that sort of line in the sand to say, this is a time by which I want to publish my book and share it with the world. And so once I decided that, I had lots of questions, right? Like obviously the when, what to write had already been solved by then. But then all these other questions, should we go with traditional publishing or independent publishing? I decided to go with independent publishing. I did try to go the traditional publishing route. I queried a lot of agents and publishers. I learned how to write a query letter. What is this publishing industry all about? How do you go find agents? How do you go do I pitch to an agent or a publisher? What is the difference between an editor and a publisher? So all those questions. And I decided to go the independent route mainly because mine was a nonfiction book. And every single person that I queried, an agent I queried, they asked for a platform of a gazillion followers. And I don't have a gazillion followers. As you saw, I have a pretty, full life right now. And I'm not going to be waiting for getting another million followers and doing all the things that I have to do to get those followers before I query the agent, before I become successful getting those followers, and before I publish the book. So I decided that I will just try this on my own. Of course, self-publishing means a lot more work that you have to figure out on your own, and you have to do it yourself. And thankfully, during the December timeframe, I usually have a project, my personal project that I want to work on. And this became my personal project for last year. And I decided to figure out how to do formatting, how to do cover design, all the go-to market stuff, which is just as important, by the way, as writing, which I thoroughly enjoy. I'll write any day. If you just give me some time, I'll just sit down and write. But the other part of it, and this is just like making software, right? Like I'm a programmer in my day job, and I love to write code. But the other things, getting your product once it's built to market, that's always this big thing that you have to really figure out. But you have to get it right in order to be able to sell your product really well. Same thing, how do you make sure you have your quality checks are done right? How do you format it? What programs or applications you use to format it? What applications you use to do the cover design? All of that there's just a ton of material and applications technology right now. Like Donna said, that was not available 10 years ago. I use Canva quite a bit. I learned how to use, I'm not a spokesperson for Canva. I'm not pushing that, but I use Canva quite a bit. The applications that are available at your disposal today, a number of them completely free, it just blew my mind. I was able to tinker around Canva. This cover design worked, this didn't work. Ask a few people in my inner circle, what did you think of this cover design? Same thing with formatting. If you went the Kindle route, there is the Kindle Create app that you can use. There is something called ReadZ that you can use, completely free of charge again, that you can use to format. So if you just do an online search about, okay, I want to do cover design free apps, I think you'll get a ton of suggestions, and you'll be able to use a number of them. And for me, the tinkering and the experimentation and the getting feedback was the key. A lot of those questions I pretty much solved through trial and error and getting feedback and seeing how it worked. Lastly, marketing is not something that I'm very good at. I'm an engineer by profession.
Lies. You are, in fact, probably the best book marketer I've ever met in real life.
Thank you.
So you shut up. Yeah. You're way better than me. I'm like, I wrote a book. I never want to talk about it again.
No, but seriously, I think, again, I talk about this in my book. This applies to career, growing in your career as much as to publishing and getting your book out. A lot of us, we don't like to talk about ourselves. We don't like to talk about the work we did. And, and this is true when it comes to what is blocking your promotion as much as what is blocking you from getting your word out, your message shared with the world, because we don't like to go and, say, oh, I wrote this book, come and see, and multiple times, right? But it is important, and I had to get it out of my comfort zone and do it. And every time I talk about my book, sometimes I actually have these conversations with Donna. So, hey, am I talking too much about my book? And Donna's like, no, you're not talking too much about your book, But it is important. It's your product. You made it, and you're proud of it, and it's something that you want to share with the world. You wrote it because you think it's gonna somehow have a meaningful impact on the world. It's going to entertain the world. It's going to educate the world. Something there, that message, you wrote it for a purpose. And it's important to share it with the world. It's important to, talk about it from the rooftops, right? I know it's uncomfortable for if you're like me, an introvert, it's uncomfortable, but it is something that you have to do. Social media platforms, I posted a lot on social media platforms. And interestingly, my relationships that I have built over the years, a lot of the people, once they knew that I wrote about the book, they actually talked about it too. And that really helps because that amplifies your message quite a bit, because now it's not just your network, your friends are talking about it, your family is talking about it. So I think that's, using your relationships and really getting out of your comfort zone to market. I think that was another key part of my journey as well.
Oh, okay. So I just randomly jammed the slide in, and I made it because it's horribly designed. Okay, here is something to know. There are two paths to publishing that I know of. There's probably lots of other paths. I started in 2002, and I started with fiction, right? And please do not ask me why I decided to be a fiction author. It is so random why I decided to do this. But I give credit to fiction authoring for everything. It gave me the ability to improv, make stuff up really fast, gave me the ability to speak in public about literally any topic because I make stuff up for a living. That's what I do. And being a fiction author is pretty magical because you get to learn all these skills. You learn dialogue, you learn setting, you learn how to connect with the brains of psychopaths, all kinds of like useful corporate skills. So when I started fiction writing, the intention was not to become like a published author. It was to have something to do where I'd make lots of friends. But after I finished the draft of my first book, which was really godforsaken, okay, I was taking, how it all started was I was taking a fiction writing course at Bellevue College, kind of near where my house was. It was a community college back then. And it was actually a really good course because it takes you through the entire journey of you write your book, you learn about setting, you learn about character, you learn about all the stuff. And then at the end, you learn about how to pitch to agents, how you write a query letter, how do you get rejected, how do you deal with rejection. So I went through the whole process. When I finished my first book, I reached out to literary agents. Back in the day, and this is still a way to do it, there are 3 ways to do it. One is to look at publishers marketplace. So if you just look up publishers marketplace right now, it's a website where you see all the recent deals. So these are all the deals to big publishing houses or even small publishing houses by literary agencies. So each agency usually focuses on a few topics. And what they do is they will take an author's work, who they sign with an author, and they'll take the author's work and pitch it to a bunch of agencies or a bunch of publishing houses. And when they get a deal, they'll go circle around to all the other publishing houses and try to get an auction going. Okay. So the best case scenario is when more than one publishing house wants your book, because then there's what's called a bidding war. And then they'll get to a point where you will get a higher royalty or a big signing agreement. So they're rated by deals. There's like nice deal, very nice deal, good deal, very good deal, excellent deal. The ratings make no sense, but pretty much it's, is your deal under $50,000? Is your deal over $100,000? And these deals, honestly, they mean nothing because I know people who've signed very good deals, made no money from their book. So it's all about the publishing house's cut and what they take. I believe the publishing industry is like an amazing racket because they've figured out a way to take the author's IP, and they all make a lot of money from it, and the author makes almost nothing. I say as somebody who's known a lot of published authors in my day, and pretty much the top 5% of authors make good money, like livable wage, and the rest of them, you need lots of other jobs. This is why you see authors doing lots of things, like teaching things and speaking and doing all this, because it becomes this concept of a book as a business card. It opens doors for you rather than it being your primary source of income. Of course, there's authors who are not like that, right? Colleen Hoover is on the New York Times bestseller list for fiction, and she, I think, has like 7 out of the 10 spots. So I love that for her. But it's not super, super common to be able to make a lot of money being an author. It happens, right? But it's not the most common thing. So what I did was I babysat Publishers Marketplace, and I went to this thing called pw.org. So it's poetsandwriters.org. And there's a list of literary agents. And this thing shifts all the time. They're showing agents who are accepting queries right now. So it's really important to say, are these agents accepting query letters right now? Because they're trying to grow their author list. And then the third thing I did was really get deeply involved with writing conferences. Writing conferences I found to be the best way to do any of this because I'm an in-person person. I don't do well with doing stuff by myself at home. So twice a year, I used to go to a writing conference. By the way, I didn't tell anyone at work I was doing this. So I'd be like, I'm gone on a family thing. So writing conference is like 2-3 days. I went to Pacific Northwest Writing Conference in Seattle near SeaTac Airport and Willamette, which was outside Portland. 3 days, and it's just like any conference. So there's themes. There's like, are you writing fiction? Are you writing nonfiction? Are you writing children? What are you writing? And then there's a lot of deep workshops on crafting realistic dialogue, how to make a setting when you've never been there. So a bunch of topics. And then, of course, there's the popular ones like the editors panel. So you have the lead editor of 5 publishing houses talking about the most interesting book they bought that year, what's doing really well in the market, what they see trending in the next year. So I found it very useful for industry knowledge. So I recommend if any of you are really serious about fiction writing specifically, and probably nonfiction too, it's worth going to a writing conference just so you'll learn the entire industry in like 3 days. So I believe it's worth doing, even now to this day. If I was starting my writing career again, I would go to a writing conference. So that's what I did. I met my agent at a writing conference. So editors and agents will often have hours where they receive pitches. So they'll say, sign up for my pitch hour. And I had written an entire fiction novel. I recommend if you're going to write fiction, write the whole thing because you actually don't know how your book will end. And often agents and editors will say, after you send a query letter is usually, hi, my book is about this. Here's why it's interesting to you because you do deals like this. It's 60,000 words and you can get in touch with me here. Often agents and editors will say, that sounds great. Send me the whole thing. I know a publishing house who's interested. And you can't be like, yeah, I'll send it in 3 months. You have to send it tomorrow. So I really recommend you write the whole fiction book, especially for your first one. For the next one and the next one and the next one, it doesn't even matter because these houses will usually sign a 2-book deal. So they'll say, write your first book, and then they want either this and a sequel or this and something tied loosely to it. So once I sent in I sent a query letter. Sorry, I'm like way ahead. I'm at a writing conference. I have a completed manuscript, fiction. I pitch to agents. So how it works is there's 5 of you sitting in a circle. It's really terrifying. An agent will say, tell me about your book. And you have 2 minutes to pitch your book. And they'll say, that sounds great. Please send me 3 chapters and a query letter. And they'll give out their information. So your job is to go home that night and send it. So that's how I met my agent. Her name is Elaine Spencer. She's with the Knight Agency. I had an agent before her who actually did my first 2 deals, named Shoshana Crichton at Crichton Associates. And I met her exactly the same way. I met her at Pacific Northwest Writing Conference. And then Elaine I met at like an Atlanta, Georgia writing conference. Ironically, 3 places in the world that have the most conferences are Seattle, New York, and San Diego. So they have a ton of writing conferences. So if you live around those areas, those are great places. UK has a ton of writing conferences. So if you ever get a chance to go, it's a very, very good thing to do. I highly recommend it. Did that answer the question about how to find a literary agent? So if you're not at a conference, the best thing to do is see agents who are doing deals on Publishers Marketplace or who are accepting queries and make sure that they represent your kind of work, right? So some will say, I represent business books for finance. Some will say, I represent children's books. Some will say, I represent paranormal fiction. So make sure they represent your kind of work. And then you can send them a query letter. They'll have instructions. They'll say, send query letter and 3 chapters or query letter and 1 chapter. Follow the instructions. People get really creative and do other things. Don't send them things like physically in a box. Don't do any of it. Just follow exactly their instructions because they have an assistant who receives the first draft of everything and then they pass it on to the agent. Is that it?
You covered it, all of it?
Okay, I think that's it for the, oh yeah, so that is traditional publishing. It took me a long time. It will not take you all this long. I didn't know what I was doing. First of all, I'm a pretty terrible writer. I'm not a good writer. I don't write naturally.
You're a great writer. Come
No,
on.
I'm actually a terrible writer. I think I'm a good talker and I can write down what I said, but I'm not a good writer by default. My agent actually told me, she's like, you're not a great writer, but you're funny. I'm like, I can work with that. See, I can work with that. That's not bad. Publishing industry is brutal. They're not nice to you. And it's okay. It's okay. I don't think it's bad. They're very direct, right? Also, their industry's broke. All the houses have bought each other. So it's not like tech where there's abundance. They're broke. Everyone is poor. They're all based in New York. Cost of living's high. Your average, person who works at a publishing house makes like $75,000 a year, and that is the cap. So it's not a wealthy industry. The wealthiest people in a publishing house is like the CEO. So
yeah, I think.
Do you want me to explain some of the roles in a publishing house? Because I think it's
Let me ask you some questions because there are some very good questions coming in the chat. But I think the first thing that I want to say before I start with the questions is The publishing industry, because I did spend some time writing those query letters, learning how to query, agents and reaching out to publishers. Especially if you're not an established author, you have to be prepared to have a lot of silence and rejection. I would say that I probably wrote, I don't know, 100 query letters or more, and maybe 5 responses to the 100 query letters, right? So it was a very, very small percentage of people that are responding to you. And then the people that respond to you, they may not all convert into your agent, or they may not be interested in your book. They may ask you to write your book completely differently, and you may not be willing to do that because you have a certain message and a certain angle that you want to land and market. So my advice is that be prepared for a lot of rejection and silence, and that's okay. I think most people, there are very famous authors that people talk about how they have had a lot of rejection for their manuscripts, right? So I think that's something that you should be willing to accept. So we have a question from Joanna. What is the difference between a literary agent, a publisher, and an editor? And do we need all three in traditional publishing?
Okay, so let's start with the process. There's an author, which is you. There's an agency, a literary agency, and then there's a publishing house. Okay. In traditional publishing, you needed all three. Nowadays, there's a lot of more independent publishing houses that are not a huge house like Simon & Schuster or Penguin Random House. There's quite a few houses. In Seattle, there's a lot. There's Montlake Publishing, there's Hill Publishing, there's that one on Cap Hill with the funky name, I can't remember what it's called, Kogan Page. So there's a lot of publishing houses and they specialize. O'Reilly, right? O'Reilly is a tech publishing house, everyone knows. Pact, these sorts of things. And they're really specialist. They're like, we focus in tech books about, something hands-on, like Java. Or we focus in business books, or we focus in sci-fi. Fenris Publishing focuses in funny comic books. What is it? Sasquatch Publishing does sort of beautiful coffee table picture books, like 20 lists for bucket list or something, right? Those kind. So there's a bunch of these like very specific smaller publishing houses. You don't need an agent for those at all. You can just query them directly with your idea, with your finished product or your pitch or whatever it is you want to. Now, how it usually works for this is traditional. Author writes a book, author gets in touch with an agent. Agent gets no money till you get money. If there's an agency saying, pay me $25,000 and I'll get your book published, that's not an agency, that's a scam. So don't do that. What the agent does is they take your manuscript and then they help you get it ready to be pitched to a publishing house. So they'll probably work with you on a few rounds of revisions. They'll say, okay, let's tighten up the query letter. What is your real point of view? What is your book like, right? So they'll say things like, last year, this book called, what was that book about Alabama and like, whatever, some book did super well. And they'll say, my book is like that.
Where the crawdads sing or something?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
It's not Alabama, but I mean.
Whatever. I love how we know each other so well that you know what I mean. And like something with swamps in Alabama, and you're like, okay. So it's like where the crawdads sing button space, right? Whatever. And they'll help you put together a pitch that's resonating with editors because their job is to know the industry. They also know inside baseball, like, hey, this publishing house really wanted that manuscript and they missed out on it. They lost at the auction. So we can pitch them something really similar. So they know these things. That's why it's kind of worth, I think, to have an agent, especially if you're planning to have a long writing career, right? I think the question is, do you want to do this as an experiment and say like, yeah, let's see if I even like being an author, or do you want to have a long writing career with many books and you want to do this for, I don't know, 10, 20 years? When I started, I thought, yeah, I want a long writing career and I want to be an author. Someday I'm going to be a full-time author. Spoiler alert, I'm not doing that. I think I'll never write again. But, it took 20 years to realize that. So I'm glad I went this route. So what they do is the agent will get your book ready to be pitched to a publishing house. And in a publishing house, there's a person called an editor. And the editors are the ones who buy books. They're the ones who say, I want to buy this book for this publishing house. And they will make an offer. They'll be like, we want to pay you $25,000 for this. So royalties will come after that. So $25,000 will be what we call an advance. So you would get an advance on the book, meaning probably they'll probably split it in half, like $12,000 on signing the contract, $12,000 when you deliver the final copy. And then once you complete $25,000 in sales of the book, then you start collecting royalties. So the royalties will be, I don't know, 12, 20% of the sale of the book. So if your book is $20, if you're doing 10% royalties, you make $2 a book after you sell out your advance. So a lot of authors would rather get a smaller advance and higher royalties, because then if your book is going to be around for a long time, especially if it's like a business book, business books are not just going to sell for 1 year. It's going to be pretty evergreen themes. It's almost better to do it that way. So that is an editor. There's no real like person called a publisher. It's kind of like everyone is a publisher at a publishing house. The person you work with is an editor. It's a misnomer because someone thinks of an editor as someone who edits your book. They have copywriters for that in publishing houses. If you're working with a publishing house, they kind of do a lot of stuff for you. They'll ask you for ideas on the cover design, but they'll put it together. They'll ask you for ideas on the formatting, but they'll actually put it together because they've got a brand and a look that they like to go with. They also get sometimes space in bookstores, so your book will have like a section because they've negotiated some deal that they have some percentage of a bookstore. Now, bestseller lists are very funny because publishing houses predetermine what is going to be a bestseller, okay? And it's often based on the advance. They're like, we paid this money, author a humongous advance, we want this to be a bestseller. So the quickest way to have a bestseller is to have it in Hudson Bookstore at the airport. Fact. And for your book to be a bestseller, all you need to do is sell 25,000 copies in 1 week. And that's it. That's literally the formula. If your book sells 25,000 copies in 1 week, it shoots to the top of up the New York Times bestseller list. And now your book is a bestseller, New York Times bestseller. This is a huge gamification because authors figured this out a long time ago because we're not stupid. And now every author is like, well, I can just buy $25,000 worth of my own books, right? And I'd be a bestseller. And people do this all the time. You will see often CEOs write a book and then it's a bestseller. That's because they bought it for their company. It's just a scam. Like, honestly, just because someone's on the bestseller list doesn't mean they're wealthy, doesn't mean they're a millionaire, doesn't mean they make a living from writing. It's just a random numbers game. When I wrote, I think 2 of my business books, and Raji wrote hers, we debuted at #1 on Amazon in the category. Mine was #1 in business and money, and hers was #1 in career. It's getting a lot of eyeballs that week. That's what bestseller means. Does this answer these questions?
Yeah, I think so. I think, Joanna, please feel free to add other comments if it feels like we haven't answered your question fully. But I think what I heard, Donna, is there are pros and cons to going the traditional publishing route. The pros are it's easier to get into bookstores because for me as a self-publisher, I literally have to hustle after every bookstore and go and say, hey, here is my book. I'm a local author and here's what it's about and here's what the response has been. Would you be willing to get it from Ingram? And by the way, even if you're a self-published author, you can actually get your book into Ingram, which is the platform that all the bookstores and libraries use to source their books. So you can do it, but it's a lot of hard work that you have to go after every bookstore and do that. Like Donna said, I think as a traditional publisher, as an author who's been traditionally published, you can actually get your book into the bookstore more easily. There's no guarantee, even if you went with a traditional publishing route, you will get your book into the bookstore. I think there's a lot of algorithms and selection that goes on there. You get the cachet, right? Like if you're published with a specific publisher that has a brand name and an established, a publisher in the industry, I think you get the cachet of having their name associated with your book. But you also have very small amount of royalty coming in. For me, it's like with Amazon, it's like 70 cents for every dollar of the money that my book is making. I think if you're going the traditional publishing route, it's more like 1 cent for every dollar that you're making, right? So that's a very small amount of money you're going to make. I mean, your purpose may not be making a lot of money, but that's something to keep in mind. And of course, like I said, a lot of rejection, a lot of hard work, just getting the literary agent to represent you and getting the literary agent to be able to represent you in with the publisher. So there's a lot of rejection and possibility of not actually getting this land properly there as well. And then you lose control.
I
Yeah.
want to share with you just a numbers game, just to back up what Raji's saying. There's no right way and wrong way, right, to go about your publishing journey. It's just which experience do you want to have. I sent 80 query letters for my third novel, 80. And this is my third one after I knew what I was doing. I got back, out of those 80, I got back 20 responses saying, interesting, send me the whole thing. And I got one accept. So in terms of numbers, and I'm saying that is like a person who's not a great writer. Okay. There's people who write magical fiction. I am not one of those people. But a lot of people will tell you that's not that unusual. So fiction writing is a game of resilience. This is why I believe probably the most important hack is to have a critique group of people who you write with, totally different concepts, who keep your spirits afloat. Otherwise, it's brutal going through this journey. So sorry to interrupt, but it's just
the only
the
last thing
mindset on this is,
Yeah, I think you also lose control, right? Like I think a little bit of, you have to basically go with, you obviously you are able to provide feedback and your input, but ultimately I think if your editor wants a different cover design and you want, or your publisher wants a different cover design, you want a different cover design, I think you'll probably have to lose some of the control that you have with this self-publishing route, where you pretty much, you like this design, you go with it, right? So I think that's what I find is the pros and cons of traditional publishing versus self-publishing that you have to evaluate before you choose one. I think
I have a funny story for you.
Yeah.
And here's another scam in the publishing world. Say you're in a house, and a lot of people go after these big houses because they published like a big name author, like James Clear, Simon Sinek, or Nora Roberts, or some big name who's on the list all the time. If you're in a house with that same author, you can get them, and I'm saying this for Philippe's comment, your editor can ask them to write a quote for your book. They did not read your book. They're like, look at this book, act like you know about it, write this quote. And that author gets paid a certain amount of money for that quote to put on the back of your book. Because now the publishing house is seeing a quote from Simon Sinek on your business book. And people pick it up, right? When you see it on the front, Simon Sinek says this is the best business book he's read in his life. I'm like, really, is it better than his own? I don't know. So that boosts sales for the publishing house. And the first author, got a cut and they don't care. And you just benefit because you're suddenly getting the social proof of Simon Sinek. So whenever you see X famous author really loves this book, it's a scam. I only know this because I went through this process. They were like, do you want X author to put their quote on your book? I'm like, no, that's weird. They didn't read it. And I don't feel right about that because I'm like, I don't know, man. If that person read it and loved it, I want their quote. But otherwise, I don't like that at all. But it's a very common practice, just so you know.
I was just starting to write my my answer to this really good question. What's the best route? And Ritika asks this, what's the best route if your primary goal is to have a book as a passive income stream? And I was starting to write, I think with self-publishing, you have a lot more royalty coming in, but you also, it's not necessarily passive. You also have to do a lot of hard work of boosting your sales and marketing and getting the word out. And it's not necessarily passive. Maybe at some point, once you've sold enough copies, I think the word of mouth will take over and it becomes passive. But I think with self-publishing, that it's not passive at all, at least per my experience. I know with traditional publishing, is that a passive income stream over the years, Donna?
So it's literally like the opposite of passive, but it's not active like working in a day job every day, right? Where you'll do some marketing activities and it'll pay off. The thing to know is books are evergreen. So, and I wish I was kidding. My friend Paul in New Zealand, like they had Eating Disorder Awareness Week, and someone legitly ordered 100 copies of my book about an eating disorder that I wrote because of someone I knew in high school with an eating disorder. It was fiction. And they ordered 100 copies of this. And I'm like, how do I get rid of this book? How do I make it disappear? Because most of the concepts and things are super out of date. So these things live on forever. And so yes, there's like a little boost of passive income that comes, but I will say that you almost have to like make it a business, right? Where you think of each book as a product that you ship. And you have to think about different ways of marketing that product. Like, for example, Raji's doing a really nice job. She's like, this is a great New Year's, start the New Year fresh process. This is a great graduation gift. This is a great, like, starting the fiscal year if you work in certain tech industries, right, in September. This is a great holiday reading, reset yourself. So you almost have to follow like the social media calendar. If I was, say, going to write a book about mental health, which I won't, I would think about like, okay, start the year off right, Mental Health Awareness Month, um, Accessibility Disability Awareness Month, um, Suicide Prevention Day, these sorts of things. It's not taking advantage, it's just that you have a resource that can help people who are thinking about that day. So I think it's important to remember your book is a product. The most passive income is buying property and holding on to it, not having tenants, right? But holding on to it. But it's a good passive-ish income, but you do have to do a bunch of work up front. I'm watching Raji go through the process of what you should do to be a proper book marketer, and it's wonderful. And you know what? I'm going to ask you about that. There's a question I want to answer in here saying, if you self-published, would traditional publishers look down on you later? And the answer is no, not at all. In fact, many of the people on the New York Times bestseller list right now are people who self-published, and traditional publishers will say, you're doing really well. Your book is good. You've built an audience for yourself. We want to publish your next work. That's become more and more and more common. Traditional publishers are almost looking at self-published books that are doing really well in the rankings on Amazon, especially, and using that as their way of publishing their next person, even more than unpublished authors that they get query letters from, because it's already vetted, right? They lose nothing because they're like, actually, you already have an audience. You know how to write. You know how to do a lot of stuff. We will just take it and package your next work to be better. So I've known many authors who self-publish their first and then their second or their sequel or their third and their fourth are all done by big publishing houses.
I'm answering the question right now in chat, might as well talk about it. Bo asks, how does a publisher do marketing? And correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, but I think that traditional publishers market heavily for certain big name authors.
Yeah.
And it's not just because you published with a traditional publisher, they're going to very aggressively market your book. A lot of my friends who've gone with the traditional publishing route, they still have to do pretty much what I'm doing, which is be out there and market your book. But if they choose your book to market aggressively, I think they probably have a much more well-oiled machine than I do to understand how to market it, how to get your name in front of all these very famous people, et cetera, et cetera. But that's my perspective. Yeah.
It's for big names. It's usually for celebrities or like the Tim Ferrisses of the world.
Michelle Obama. Right.
And then exactly. And then they're like, again, they've decided that book is going to be a bestseller. They pre-decide. Traditional houses plan their book list out 2 years in advance. They buy your book, they're not publishing it that year. It's going to be in another year. That's my other issue. If you're writing something that's very timely, like if I was going to write something on AI right now, which I won't, I would never go with the traditional house because they'll publish in the year 2028, right? No, I would self-publish that baby like in 3 months and hit the market and reach people when they need to be reached. The other thing they do is they look at their marketing budget and decide. They were like, okay, we've got maybe 12 months, a big house, and they have lots of imprints, right? So it'll be the business imprint, the finance imprint, the personal development imprint. So think like all of these different imprints, and specific editors manage each imprint. It's just like departments in a business. So they'll say, okay, we want to spend, I don't know, $100 million doing marketing, and we're going to put $50 million of that for Tim Ferriss's latest. And then let's split the rest amongst the other people who we want to become bestsellers. So they will assign a PR person, agency to each of these people to line up interviews, podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. And for the authors who didn't, you get literally nothing. I don't mean like you get some, you get nothing. If you say, hey, I've got, they won't even set up a book signing for you. When I got published, I wanted to do a book signing in my hometown, Ann Arbor, Michigan, where it was the flagship Borders, remember Borders? And they said, oh, okay, I guess we can help you with that. So I had to request them to make me just like a big board with a book cover and to ship me a bunch of books. And that took like maybe 4 months of work. I could have done it myself in like an hour going to Kinko's and ordering shit from Amazon. Like I found the marketing PR portion of these big houses, and I mean, these are big houses. I haven't worked with one of the smaller indie houses. I found that to be like kind of exhausting. But you get your name out there as a part of traditional house if it's important to you. So it's both. And I know, Joanna, you had a question around you thought you had to have an editor before you found a literary agency. There's two kinds of editors. One kind of editor is one who like edits your book. That's called a copywriter. They call themselves book editors, but that's not what they are. A copywriter is someone who goes through and helps you with structure and formatting, and maybe they've worked in a publishing house before, but they'll help you with your grammar and your sentence and say, this doesn't make as much sense. This is expensive, right? It's going to cost $1,000 plus probably. And if you feel that you're not a good writer, you may want to hire an editor to go through this and help you kind of finesse your work before it goes to literary agents. I didn't do that because I didn't know about it. I definitely would do that now because I don't think I'm good enough of a writer to just like publish my book from the start. But then there's the kind of editor in a publishing house whose job it is to really buy your book and then package it, right? It's like, imagine shipping a startup, a prototype product to a production product. It's the same thing. So they take your prototype and make it production with a lot of help from you and like the editorial staff and the cover designer and this and that and the next thing.
While we're waiting for, oh, there's one more. How to protect your book. How does copyright work?
Yeah, I didn't do any of this.
No. I think when you publish,
yeah.
you basically say you have the copyright, and you
Yeah.
know, I think I don't know if I had I have not gone around trying to see how I can protect my work. I'm assuming that, you know, if I mean, the one thing I've heard about publishing on Amazon is that once you publish on Amazon, there may be third parties that actually try to buy your book and sell it at a lower price or higher price or something like that. You know, that's something that maybe you need to be watching out for. But I have not actually done anything more than just, you know, make sure that I have the rights to all the words that are in the book. And, you know, that's pretty much what I've done with copyrights.
Yeah, I really don't. Everyone's obsessed with copywriting. I'm like, very few people are trying to copy your work. It's just not a common phenomenon. I've never experienced this once, nor has anyone I know experienced it. Plagiarism also is like really easy to detect. You say, my book was published on this date. Yours was not. Solved, right? It's solved really easily, and the takedowns are fast.
I do have one question for you. What was your biggest, you know, hurdle in this whole process?
I would say it's two things. One was actually sitting down and writing. My process is real random. Okay, so Raji's got like an actual process where she journals every day and makes progress. I'm a Python where I will create a large amount of stuff at once and then not do it for like 3 weeks. So I will sit down and write maybe like 6 hours one day. The way I write is in a OneNote. So I'll say I'm writing a book and all these tabs are a chapter. So chapter 1, chapter 2, and I do not write them in order. I'll say, let me throw words in chapter 8, throw words in chapter 1, and probably those chapters will move around. Chapter 8 will probably become chapter 4. They're just around themes. So I'll throw in a bunch of words. And when I'm at a point where I have enough words in each chapter, I don't write the beginning and I don't write the end. I don't do either of these. These two like do not exist to me. Once I have enough content, like actual meaty, fleshy content, that's when I will go to Word, like an actual document, and put it down and say, how does this flow? Once it flows, I'll add just ginormous to-do comments because I'm a dev, like to-do, find source, to-do, add more story, to-do, add here, to-do, add there. And then I'll go through, do that part, and then write an introduction and write a close. So that's my process. I can now write a book in 3 months because I have the process. Right. Again, I write in extreme sprints. So I'll be obsessed for a weekend and then not look at it again for 2 weeks. So that's my process. It's not good. So I don't recommend people follow my process. I'm saying if you're that kind of worker, it totally works for you. It's the neurodivergent urge, right? To overproduce here and then promptly forget about what you're doing. So that for me is probably the first part. The second part is sticking with it. When you write a book, you've chosen a platform to be part of your brand for a long time. So for example, if you're going to go out and write a book on, I don't know, business practices of people in France, you got to be really committed to that. You're going to be like talking about this for 2 to 3 to 4 years. So be ready to keep on talking about it and refreshing it to be relevant, right? So for example, Raji is doing a really good job of this because she's got the career advice from a woman in tech for 20 years. There's a bunch of things here. One is career advice for mid-career people. second one is honestly the immigrant experience. Like you talk a lot about how when you moved to the US, you were like a really shy kid. And the thought of doing this kind of webinar, you would have promptly died, right? It would have been like, I will kill you, Donna, if you make me do this.
Yeah.
And the third one is talking through what is it like to be, you know, a misfit just in the world, right? What is it like to be a misfit and a total weirdo? So those are three themes she's picked out. And she's going to pick out probably in the next year 3 more interesting themes. And often your audience will find the themes for you and say, for Raji, for me, as somebody who's a career switcher, I found so many amazing insights into this. And she's like, oh, I didn't think about career switchers, but interesting audience, right? So really, really like deeply committing to the platform you're in. Yes, so I think doing a copyright thing is interesting. You go to copyright.gov, I think. If you have like you're saying, photographs or diagrams, it is worth going through the process. I think that if you're going to copyright something, copyright it for and use it for more than one thing, because it is expensive to copyright things. So if you're going to say put these in a book, also maybe think about doing a coffee table book. Also think about taking the art and like showing it in, you know, an art museum or a coffee shop. So figure out ways to reuse it rather than just copywriting for a book. Like Annie Leibovitz does this. I interviewed her last year, and she like takes images. They show up in magazines, they show up here, they show up there, they're in her book, they're in her website, they're in her social media. So think of like 5 places to reuse copyrighted material because you're putting in a bunch of investment.
Yeah. I think we are running out of time. We have to be respectful of people's time as well. But I just wanted to close by saying, I think I talk about this a lot in the Daring to Be Different book, where I talk about career skills. One of the things is exposure that is very, very important for career success, right? So as much as it makes you uncomfortable to talk about your book, to ask people to review your book and send you images and pictures of people reading your book and so on. I think exposure is super important. I talk a lot about courage and agility and things like that as well. So I think, you know, we covered a lot of the questions about publishing, but a lot of that is around, you know, just getting outside your comfort zone. And it is, as much as writing is a delightful process for me, I think the rest of the getting to market is a very uncomfortable journey, and I think you should be willing to take on that uncomfortable journey if you want to be a published author. That's been my biggest learning.
Okay, so one last question. I know we're over. What do you do about that voice in your head where I know you've had to overcome this, as many introverts do. How do you get over, what are people thinking of me? What are people saying about me? How do you get over that?
I think the blogging process really helped me overcome that fear step by step, right? Like I have written, I don't know, over 100 blogs now, maybe more than that, right? And every time I hit publish on one of the posts, I had to deal with that fear of rejection. Just like anything that, you know, you're planking for 1 minute and the next time you can plank for 1.5 minutes, you know, it's just your muscle gets stronger and stronger. I know Donna is going to type, I don't plank for 10 seconds.
I'm like, who the hell planks for 2 minutes? Like, am I in the Olympics?
Yeah, but it's a muscle. Like, I think the ability to overcome that inner critic, I think you have to practice and you have to do it constantly. And this is why I'm a strong believer in doing it, you know, regularly in little baby steps, because it, as much as it helps you with the feedback and doing a lot of A/B testing and building your platform, which is super important. You know, a lot of my readers, my very early readers for my book, they were my blog followers on my blog, right? So I think it helps you build your platform as a writer as well. But I think a key thing that it helped me overcome was this sort of imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is something I talk about quite a lot in the book for my tech career, because I deal with that a lot as a senior leader in Microsoft. I deal with imposter syndrome quite a bit, right? But it's the same thing as a writer. I mean, even probably more of an imposter in the writing industry than in my tech industry, because I've done this for 20 years. I'm a complete newbie in the publishing and writing industry. So it's very easy to feel that. So I think practice, develop your mantras, and, you know, do it in little baby steps is my advice.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. I hope this was helpful and informative. We're both extremely findable. And if you haven't, go check out Raji's book. She shares way more wisdom in it than she shared here. And if you have other questions for us, let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, friends. Bye-bye.
Bye.